Simon, firstly, thank you very much for coming in. We have a wealth of notes around us that we'll talk through in just a minute. But firstly, just describe to me what your profession is. What is a notophilist?
A notophilist is a person who collects banknotes, a bit like somebody who collects coins is a numismatist, and a stamp is a philatelist. But banknote collectors have been called notaphilists.
Well, of course, in the UK, there are billions of notes with the Queen Elizabeth II's image on. That will need to change in the coming weeks, months, years. Just tell us a bit about the process now in the way of getting King Charles III's image on our cash.
This is going to take a considerable amount of time because it's going to take at least probably 6 months for a designer to come up with some new image or idea. I mean, I do have on the table here a mock-up note that was for Jersey that gives you some kind of idea of what type of thing that is possible to do.
But tell us a little bit about how it will happen then, because when King George VI died, the Queen's father, of course, it took quite some time before the Queen's image, that we'll talk through in a minute, started appearing on these notes.
In the Commonwealth, they produced the first note for Cyprus in 1952, which was the first note with the Queen on. But in England, it took a lot longer for some reason, and the first note was the £1 note with the Queen on, issued in 1960, and that's the very first note in England with the Queen on.
So how long are we expecting to still see notes with the Queen's image on?
Well, that's an interesting question, because the £20 note, for example, was produced with the idea that they would stay in circulation for a long time. Now, because they've never had polymer notes in circulation for such a length of time before, they don't really know how long these notes are expected to last. As a norm, they're meant to be 2.5 times longer lasting than paper notes. So there is a the expectation was that the £20 note, for example, could last for 8 years, but no one really knows.
Well, we have so many pictures, different pictures of the Queen on all of these notes throughout the years, and of course from other countries across the Commonwealth. Let's start by chatting about the oldest, perhaps, and I'll just get this up for our viewers at home to see. This is the first ever note with the Queen's image on.
This is the first note in England issued, and Wales, of course, with the picture of the Queen on, yes. And that's 1960.
And tell us why that happened so many years after she became Queen.
There's no known knowledge about why that is the case. All that happened was the Queen consented permission for her image to be used on the notes for the first time in England, and that's what happened.
Of course, here we've got shillings, which of course you could get in note form back then. Tell it, how much would these be worth now if you, as a notophilist, were to try and sell these on to other collectors?
It's basically all about what the prefix letter is. Some of the notes, if they're the first million of these notes, can be very valuable indeed. For example, the O'Brien green £1 note is only worth anything between £5 and £12, depending on condition. But a first million one is £400.
Well, let's just have a look over here then. Because tell us a little bit more about these as they evolved through time, away from these quite old-fashioned sort of stylings.
Yes. Well, obviously, designs changed, and they had to come up with new notes. So they decided to come up with a historical set of notes, which have got on the back famous people from our history. The fivers are very famous because it's got Wellington on.
Yeah, there he is on the back there.
The pound has got Newton, 20's got Shakespeare, and the 50's got Wren.
Why is it so important that the Queen's image kept getting updated as we made these new notes?
Because obviously over time the Queen aged, and they had to come up with a more moderate portrait, which is what they did in the third set, which is here.
These are perhaps notes that we're more familiar with now. These are still from the 90s. This is just a standard fiver. Still fine. I won't try and nab that in my pockets before you go, Simon, although I am tempted. Just tell us a little bit about the Commonwealth notes, because what's interesting about those is that each country is using a very different picture of the Queen.
Yes, there are many, many different types of portrait of the Queen. It's also worth mentioning that the Queen is the most depicted human being on banknotes ever.
Wow.
There's no one else depicted in so many. And they first started depicting her on the Commonwealth in 1952 with a note from Cyprus.
Yeah.
And over time, more and more countries in the Commonwealth added her to their, started to put her on the notes.
Which ones are your personal favourites in terms of style and design?
For me, the nicest design one I think is this one,
Let's
that
take a look at
portrait.
that. And that was, of course, from Bermuda. These will all have to go out of circulation in various countries that still adopt the Commonwealth notes with pictures of Queen Elizabeth II on. That's also going to be quite some process in terms of getting different pictures of Charles on notes all around the world.
Oh yes, this will have to be a major change. And some countries in the Commonwealth already have stopped putting the Queen on their notes anyway. But it's worth a thought that Antigua use currently the East Caribbean currency notes, and the Queen is on those, and they'll obviously make a change.
Yeah. I'm holding up a picture of the Fiji note because it's my favourite. So I'm the colour of yellow. Let's just talk about this one in a sec then, because I mean there was no reason. This was done how many years ago?
I think it's about 1991.
This was a mock-up of what a note with King Charles III might look like.
Yeah.
Why was that done, and was it just a bit of, let's see what we could come up with? When
yes, that's exactly what it is. And basically what the designers do with these things is they play about and they add bits and pieces to the design. That's not a fully printed note by any means. They've actually used bits and pieces of printed parts and pasted it together to make it look like just as a... just to get a feel of what it looks like.
And of course, it's very finely detailed. There's a lot of etching on it.
Yes, there's fine engraving on the portrait of Charles, which has always been the most difficult part of any banknote to do. Has always been the portrait, which is why the portrait engravers in the past were the key people to have in your company.
Were you excited to see what kind of notes that we will be coming up with in terms of sterling as Prince Charles poses for a portrait, and we get something in the coming months? Yeah,
I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see whether the Bank of England do actually do anything or come up with something. We're all waiting to see what they... I mean, he's going to have to sit there, the King's going to have to sit there and be modelled. I mean, it's like doing a sculpture, isn't it? They're going to have to come up with something. And
as a notifitters, would be getting hold of those first notes be something very important to you, and making that, that'd be incredibly valuable.
The key is the first million printed. Now, Bank of England collectors collect what we call first and last, and what that means is they collect the first million banknotes issued, and the lower number they can get, the better. But they also want to buy the last notes issued of the cashier normally. And in this case, we're going to have the last note issued with the Queen on. And none of us know what those letters are going to be. It's going to be a total mystery until the day comes when they cease issuing any more notes. We just don't know.
Well, I wish you the best of luck of getting hold of them then in that case. And of course those first notes with King Charles's portrait on. Thank you very much for chatting with me today and bringing in all these lovely pound notes.